I've never actually been scared to do a video. At least not as scared as I am to do this one.
Thanks for being here, Franks.
So the past 10 years, I've spent a lot of the time in the corporate world. That's what I used to do, working for big retailers, whether in the US or the UK. For somebody who doesn't like to talk, I do quite a bit of public speaking, and I feel more comfortable talking about my own experience because that's all I can actually talk about. I can't talk about graphs and spreadsheets, and I can talk about mushrooms, and I can talk about food pretty good, but that's about it. So this
Really quick history. I had a very successful career before I gave everything up. Owned several restaurants.
About 11 years ago,
I had a farm.
which was a vegan organic farm, so no animals were harmed in that. I wasn't vegan. Fast forward through several businesses, I met my fiance. Her name was Amanda. At that point, I thought I had done everything I ever wanted to do. I had 3 successful restaurants, sold 2, had a farm. I learned everything I wanted to learn. I did it all on my own, and I felt really good about it. I had a beautiful, beautiful fiance who was a model, trained horses, loved animals. I was very ego-driven. I just wanted to be successful, and I wanted to be the best at what I was doing. One day, though, Amanda had left for work, and she never came back. She was killed in a car accident, hit head-on by a 17-year-old boy in her lane on a bridge. She couldn't get out of the way. It was not her fault.
The suffering and grief I felt was suffocating. I had 2 choices: to go down a road of self-destruction or accept what had happened and find a way through it.
All those thoughts I had about being successful, money-driven, were worth nothing.
The loss of Amanda made me realize my whole life to that point was based on ego and attachment. Being the best, cooking anything and everything without a second thought as to the consequences of my actions. As long as the food tasted great and I was paid well for it, I didn't care where it came from or if it was animals or the implications and consequences it had. I ended up laying my old self to rest, selling off the food business.
I went and lived at a Tibetan Buddhist monastery for 3 years.
one story I just wanted to share was how I even got into the whole Tibetan Buddhism monastery. And it's kind of just super ironic because one afternoon I was driving with Amanda and she noticed something about me that I just wasn't happy. I wasn't fulfilled. And oddly enough, back then I felt like I had everything, but there was still something missing. And so she asked me the question and I didn't know how to answer it. And I remember because we pulled over and we were talking like we did a lot, and I couldn't answer. So she had gone away the weekend after that and she went on our yoga retreat, and this was just a few months before she had passed away. And when she came back, she brought me this book, this Tibetan Buddhist book that I couldn't understand. I couldn't understand the words. I didn't realize, anything I knew about Buddhism wasn't this. So I tried to read it a little bit, but I just couldn't. And then come to find out when I fast forward and I go to the monastery, Padmasambhya Ling, up in New York. And after a while of studying and learning that, I stumbled upon that book again. And it just hit me. And I could understand all of it then, like with that little bit of study and learning. And anyways, super meaningful to me anyways.
And I went there.
To really sit down with myself.
And studied compassion and how my mind worked.
I was in a bad spot, and that was not a good thing. What I learned there was how to practice and train my mind to understand how I work.
What I discovered was a connection to food and heart that I had ignored. Animals suffer just as we do. From then on, it became my mission to find alternative ways to prepare amazing food that not only benefited people, but avoided animal suffering as well.
The only thing I can do is explain how I process things and how it might relate to you. By practicing compassion and really understanding what compassion is, the difference between empathy and sympathy, the difference between feeling sorry for somebody else and taking on how they feel is really groundbreaking to me. I mean, it's painful. I still live it every day. It's not as hard anymore as it was when I lived then, but it's still there.
That time reflecting and learning helped me reorientate my own moral compass and opened up a whole new world of creative cooking. It also helped me become much less of a jerk.
We all know things get better in time, right? Or at least they fade. I never wanted that feeling to fade. And to remind myself, tattooed it all over my body. All these tattoos have Amanda's ashes in them. They're not because I'm a badass, because I never want to forget where I was, why I changed my attitude, what drives me now, today, to do what I do.
I believe in compassionate action And the way I express that is through cooking and developing amazing recipes that inspire and teach people how to make and eat delicious foods without animals.
You have the power to make a difference by what you eat, and that's huge.
We're coming right around that anniversary time in July. And so for me, the month, couple weeks, the week leading up to the day of her anniversary, which will be 17 years this year, and we're coming right around that anniversary time in July, is always a little bit tougher. I'm a little bit more sensitive. But a couple things I thought might be helpful to say about how I went through it, how I dealt with grief and the loss of my partner. A lot of it I've dealt with through cooking and through trying to be a benefit to people, making food that causes no harm, because it really did affect me when Amanda passed. One of the connections that I made organically was just with, I didn't want anybody to suffer. I didn't want anybody to feel that suffering that I felt, because it was so overwhelming and so all-consuming and so it hurt. And it just immediately connected me with every single sentient being that also feels that suffering. And I don't want other people to feel like that. I don't want that suffering to occur. So a couple things with grief and me. And I'm no expert at grief. I've only know from my own experience. But what helped me was I set boundaries. I never entertained what-if scenarios. You can't do it. It just brings you down a dark hole that very hard to get out of. So I never entertained what-if scenarios around the loss. I set time limits. And by what I mean by that is, like, I would allow myself to feel any emotion, anything, but I would set a time limit on it because I didn't want it to become unproductive and I didn't want to deny any feelings that I was having. So I would set time limits, like literally set, like, I'd have an hour to dwell on this. Or sometimes if it was just like the whole grieving process, I'd set a day and then the next day I'd have to, come out of it, or I'd force myself to go do something or cook something or write a recipe or something to keep me moving. I also promised myself I would face into it and not run away from it. That was one of the reasons why I went and lived in the monastery, because I needed to learn how to sit with that anguish and that pain and that suffering. So I did that for almost 3 years, and I still sit. I try to sit as often as possible. It averages around 5 to 6 times a week, almost every day, but not always. Sometimes I can't. And just sit with those emotions and those thoughts and realize that I'm not my thoughts. I definitely don't have everything figured out. Not even the slightest bit. And if there's anything good that comes from me, it's because of her, because of Amanda. You never let it go. And the question that I always ask myself is, how do you let go of something that's a part of you? And just sit with that. Every year around this time, I honor her passing. I honor everything about her. Grief can be so isolating, so much so. It can be very lonely because people don't know how to deal with you. They don't know how to talk to you. They're scared to talk to you. And I understand. The best way to help somebody who had lost somebody and who's going through a grieving time is to actually just talk to them. I don't recall anybody ever asking me in the past 10 years how I felt about it. It's always just something nobody knows how to talk about. I kind of wish we could normalize death a little bit more. We're all going to have to go through it. We're all going to have to feel the loss of somebody. It's not something I wish upon anybody. Grieving is very personal and super unique to each person and to the circumstances around it. Here's something I wrote a while ago. It was last year. I posted this on the day she passed. Every year I want to honor Amanda, not only on her birthday, but also on this day, the day the world stopped. What I've learned about grief is that it can really cripple you if you don't pay attention. It has to run its course. It can ruin you, or it can fuel you like no other if you allow it. I experience both, no matter how little or much time goes by. In those crippling moments, overcome by loss and emotions, swelling with tears and the fear of moving on, I can't help but hear your smile and urge me to go on. You, who taught me compassion, deserve my never-ending gratitude for shaping the person I am today. If there's anything good about me, it's come from you. So here's to another year missing you and being one step closer to the day when I'll see you again, and time will no longer hold us apart. So much. Nothing needs to suffer or die for me to live a happy, thriving, successful life. I'm so grateful for Frankie and for you. For you. I mean, honestly. Ooh, what are you doing? What was that?